going to change up things a little bit. One of our goals with the workshop today is to have a few different styles and a few different types of sessions. And the second session on evolving business models of mHealth is really going to be a much more interactive session in the sense that I've asked the panelists only to bring 2 or 3 slides. In fact, I was the harsh limiter of that, right? No more than 2 or 3 slides really to kind of introduce themselves. And then I have some questions that we're going to discuss amongst ourselves a little bit and invite you into the conversation. So be thinking about the kinds of things that you've wondered about or thought about when it comes to the business model behind mHealth. But I probably don't need to tell you that the Internet of Things, we're all kind of in this world of dreaming about the Internet of Things and watching it kind of spring to life around us. And the fact that just about any device, any object, any little piece of your life can be somehow digitally enabled and linked together is an amazing thing. And of course, many businesses are very focused on, how can they monetize this? Because they see the growth. The growth is just crazy when you kind of think about just the numbers. I mean, of course, the penetration of the internet to human beings has been pretty exciting, but not nearly as exciting as when you start thinking about objects or non-human devices. And we quickly surpassed the number of humans on the internet a long time ago, and it's really hard to imagine where that's going to end. Where will be the limit of the number of devices that are operating on the internet at any given time? It's just kind of mind-boggling. And particularly when you start thinking about what do we do with all that? In my world, I teach here at the Tuck School. We spend a lot of time, thinking about, well, how can we make some money with this, right? What can we do with all this, this technology and innovation that's going on? And many companies, of course, are thinking about exactly the same thing, looking for different business models that can employ this Internet of Things. And I will say, even in the non-healthcare related areas, there are some challenges there. That it's easy to dream, and we all dream about these kinds of things. And often when I go to mHealth related conferences, I hear a lot of what I call dreams. I mean, just, wow, this could be fantastic. Yeah, we'll just do all this stuff. But then when you walk over to the other side of Sand Hill Road in California and start talking to the venture capitalists and the startup companies in that space, and you realize it's not nearly as easy as it sounds. Yeah, there's a lot of money. And when you look at the money side of things in healthcare, it's like, wow. For any entrepreneur, they're just thinking, all I want's, 1/100th of 1% of something. I'm going to be rich. This is going to be great, right? If there's trillions of dollars running around healthcare spend, I don't need to capture very much. This could be an amazing thing. But when business cases are written on that kind of argument, they fail miserably. I call it the China justification. There are many companies that had that same argument when they first went to China. Hey, there's 1 billion people there. We're going to go to China. And, all we got to do is get 1/10 of 1%, and we're going to, And they, of course, went there and failed miserably. It's very much the same in healthcare, and understanding the way spending actually occurs and where the business model of an mHealth kind of business can come from is far more challenging. And already, I've been in the last few years kind of following startups in the space, and we've been writing some case studies on that with even folks in this room, like Johnny up there from Cerner now. And we look at these companies, and they're doing really interesting things. But then when they go to market, there's another whole story going on there, and can they even survive long enough to find a market for themselves? Can they find somebody that'll actually pay them for their services or devices before they run out of the runway in terms of venture funds? And there are plenty and plenty of startups that fail every year that seem to have really kind of cool technology, cool ideas. You say as a patient, well, that would be neat, I would like to try that, and yet they don't find a market fast enough to kind of really get in the game. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little today. I feel so fortunate to have such a great panel of folks here to have this conversation with. And when we sat down to start building the panel, we were kind of thinking it through, and I said I really want somebody from a large established technology player in the health space, and you couldn't ask for anybody better than Paul Gorup to come talk about that, being the Chief Innovation Officer of Cerner, and a long history, founding history at Cerner. Someone that's been around that space for a long time. But we, I also wanted someone that could come speak to the startup side, and so we have Cameron here, who's going to be talking a little bit about some of the challenges of living in the startup world, and what works and what doesn't work, and then Joe and Chuck, both with deep backgrounds around healthcare, around technology, sitting in kind of more think tank or research kind of environments where they can sit back and look at the space and think about what's happening. So it really get kind of a great smattering of perspectives and ideas. And so what I've asked each of the panelists to do as kind of really an introduction is to simply give a little bit of background on their organization, and in particular to help us understand a little bit about how their organization is positioned in this mHealth space. How are they positioned, and kind of how are they thinking about that? And I'm going to start with Paul down here on my far right, and we'll kind of come across the panel, and each one of them has a few slides that I'm just going to hand them the clicker, and I told them they can stay seated. That's just great, because the idea is for them to give just a few minute introduction to themselves and a little bit about their organization and how it's positioned around mHealth.
For those of you who don't know, I actually was a tech student. Sat in the classroom, started about 1973. I think we were one of the first classes to sit in here. It did look a lot bigger back then for some reason. But for those of you who don't know much about Cerner, we are probably the largest standalone healthcare IT company in the world, approaching $3 billion in revenue. We have over 10,000 facilities around the world in about 25 different countries running our software. We like to say the sun never sets on Cerner. We have a huge investment in R&D. We've done over $3 billion. We still today are contributing about over $500 million to research and development. Okay, we have over 12,000 associates worldwide, and during the last 2.5, 3 years, we probably have grown that number from 10,000 to 12,000, with now over 3,000 people working in an area called population health. Okay, and I think it's kind of important that what Wendy said, we are trying to manage health. Okay, we're trying to manage a person. A patient, we always say, is probably a bad status for a person, okay? And healthcare is actually two words. And let's care for their health. Let's not worry about health care, okay? So we are really focused on that, okay? We continue to grow. We have probably one of the longest running increases, double-digit increases in revenue and earnings over our history. We have over $1.5 billion in cash. Sometimes wonder what we should be doing with it, but we'll find some things to do with it, continue to reinvest in it. And last, again, as I said, about 3 years ago, we really we changed our mission. Okay, it used to be about connecting people and knowledge and providers at the right time to achieve optimal health outcomes. We are now looking at how do we become a systemic improvement of healthcare in terms of delivery and providing that to the community. So when you start talking about population and community, you really start talking now, I need to be mobile, okay? And so Cerner, about 3 years ago, I heard about a company called SITH3 that says, hey, I've got a monitor. I can do a monitor the size of an iPhone. I can cup you once every 12 hours, and I can monitor your blood pressure, your O2 sat. I can do a 3 or 5 wire ECG. I can do your respiratory rate. I can do your skin temperature. And I said, okay, fine, let's go out and see them. Spent the next 9 months trying to find out why they were going to fail. Okay? Because over the last 10 years, I've seen probably dozens of these companies. Okay? And this is really, really, really hard. I mean, I thought in 1988 somebody would have done it in the next decade, okay, and they didn't, okay, and I kind of gave up on it. Okay, well, so here's the device, okay, it's through final FDA approval for everything but continuous blood pressure. We have a submission in on that, okay, and literally we will be able to monitor people complete vital signs continuously, okay, taking in consideration motion, water type. They can take a shower, they don't have to take it off, okay? So initially what we will do is we were going into a hospital and start monitoring all those patients that aren't monitored. Because today that's only really in the ICU, some telemetry units. Very few of those patients. And nurses walk around every 4, 6, maybe 8 hours, take a couple of the key vital signs, and then we try to extrapolate from that. Are they deteriorating? Do we need a rapid response? And all kinds of other stuff, okay? So it's really archaic in terms of how we do it today. But as we move forward, we will basically now begin to people who have high risk for readmissions, giving them this, giving them a wireless scale, CPAP machine, other things that will basically start to monitor and post-discharge so that these reimbursements, hits that you're going to take for readmissions are not going to happen, okay? And then we can always move into, the nice thing about this is not only does all those things I said, it also has extra ports to do other things. There can be a platform for continuous monitoring. We put a 2net hub by Qualcomm or somebody like that into the living room, into the house, and we can actually have almost an ICU type environment in the home, okay? That is going to be amazing, okay? And that will happen before I retire. I got a 4-year plan to retire, okay? Okay. I'll have it on me when I retire. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul. Cameron is here from Polyremedy, and he's the president and COO there, and also a Dartmouth alum who spent me a day rumbling around the green. Did you
Absolutely.
make it to the green last night to hear the band?
I did. I saw the band, yep. Yep.
A perfect night in Hanover.
Yeah, a little bit different than when we used to haul a keg across the green in a hockey bag, but you know, it's become a little more sophisticated these days. But
lights and all that good
yeah.
stuff. It was amazing. But anyway, please tell us a little bit about
sure.
the company.
And thank you, Eric, and thanks to the panel and everybody here today. So I want to talk a little bit about wound care. So wound care is obviously one of the, not as comprehensive as a company like Cerner, but we're a startup company based out of Boston that's focused on wound care. And we're in particular focused on post-acute wound care with an initial focus on home health agencies, so kind of dialing that in there. We're seeing a lot of growth in that category, unfortunately, for the U.S. healthcare system, because you've got aging, obesity, diabetes, all kind of coming together to create increases in the incidence of wound care. And a lot of what we see out in the home care environment is it's a real challenge. I mean, you get high nurse turnover. There's challenges on how to properly assess wounds. There's challenges on how to take that assessment and turn it into an appropriate treatment. and a recommendation from the nurse, a recommendation back to a physician. And then even once you get through all that, do I have the right treatment? Do I have a dressing in stock? Do I have the therapeutic that I need? How do I get it? So there's a lot of places where things can fall through the cracks. What we've created at PolyRemedy is we have a system we call a HealSmart personalized wound care system. And we have an assessment tool that clinicians can use in the field at the point of care. And that tool is used on a laptop, it's used on a tablet, on a phone, on a mobile app, or they can even call into a call center that we have to conduct a consistent assessment on wound care from a clinical workflow standpoint. Linked to that assessment is a treatment matrix that determines the right size, shape, and type of dressing treatment that's required at a particular point in time for that patient. We have proprietary technology on some advanced microfiber dressing technology where we're able to actually add things in like antimicrobial and hyaluronic acid and other ingredients that help promote wound healing. And we're able to custom manufacture in real time that wound treatment and deliver it overnight directly to the patient. So we're getting to them, we say right patient, right treatment, right time. And then as the wound progresses, as a nurse is conducting those assessments on an ongoing basis, the recipe may change for that, to get the right treatment. You'll see what we see in our patients is we see the size of the dressing may change, the type of dressing may change, the shape of it may change, and we're changing along with it to make sure that they have the optimal treatment to ensure the right outcomes. Then as our system is capturing data, we're able to provide back to the home health agency and the caregivers real-time reports and alerts and things that are helping them manage their wound care population. So that's the basic overview on the company. We're based out of the Boston area with some manufacturing and R&D out on the West Coast. We are a venture-backed company. We raised $20 million about 2 years ago, and we are continuing to develop our dressing technology and our software technology while we are commercializing this business. So I guess I only used the opening slide. So there's just a quick snapshot of our software tool. I won't go into it in detail, but you can see how a clinician can use this to track what's happening with a wound care patient, understand if there's any alerts, understand if things are moving in the wrong direction for any reason, and what they need to do to be able to tackle that. And then just a quick snapshot of some of we collect this data with our patients in the real world. So these aren't RCTs, but we're doing on an ongoing basis. We continue to collect data that's demonstrating for us and for our customers the impact of being able to achieve this consistency and this visibility and sort of this high performance personalization. And we'll get into, I think, a little bit more with the panel, frankly, some of the good things that we're doing and some of the things we're really excited about, probably as well as some of the challenges around doing things like having this exist in conjunction with electronic health records and some of the challenges around nurse training and things that are, Eric, as you were saying at the beginning, real world challenges to driving the speed and pace of adoption. So you get a system where somebody says, wow, this is really great, but how am I going to drive this across my organization? How am I going to make sure that physicians are aware? And so there are some challenges around getting sort of the full-blown commercialization.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Cameron. Chuck is next. He is the executive director at Continua Healthcare Alliance. And he's got a long background, 20 years of health care experience, particularly around technology. Was most recently the CTO at a company called MassPro, an organization called MassPro, which is really dedicated to advancing quality in healthcare. And you've had a good seat to be able to watch a lot of these things, Chuck, so give us your perspective.
Sure, thanks very much, Eric. Yeah, on this particular aspect, Continua Health Alliance is an international body. So we're a not-for-profit organization focused on the interoperability standards for how we actually connect these personal care devices. So the device that you just saw Paul actually showed, what are the standards that go into making sure that you can connect that data and make sure that it can flow into the electronic medical world. So So really what we're taking a look at here is some of the drivers for personal connected healthcare. Why is this? Why is this something that why is it that an organization like ours would be created? It's really to take a look at this demographic change. We all know that our demographics are changing, particularly not only in the US, but also in Europe. It's actually aging faster than we are. So we have an aging population and what's interesting about this is that our aging population is actually living longer. So we need to be able to monitor these individuals much longer and find a way to effectively treat them where they live, not put them in institutionalized care, whether that be long-term care facilities, but help find ways to actually monitor where they live and be able to provide a productive life for them overall. We also see an increase in chronic diseases. We know this is happening across the globe. As we see in some areas, for example, the westernization of the diets in Japan, we're seeing a significant increase in what they call metabolic syndrome, which is a precursor to diabetes type 2. We're seeing a significant issue in the Middle East with individuals with heart disease. Why? It's because they become now sedentary. They're using a more processed food type of a diet. And so we're seeing a spike in that type of an aspect of healthcare needs that are driven and that ultimately revolve into chronic diseases. Ultimately, they're diseases for which you have an episode that you don't recover from, heart failure, kidney failure, something along those lines. What we want to do first is help those individuals who have those chronic diseases manage their lifestyle more effectively and be able to do it at home. But more importantly, we want to be able to help those individuals not reach that stage and find ways to help them prevent that aspect of getting to that episodic, or that episode where they actually have damage to their body. We also know that there's a high healthcare expense. This is not a US expense. This is something that's global in nature. And we tie that to the increase in chronic diseases. We know that 75% of our healthcare spend globally, that's not something that's a US number, is based on individuals who have some form of chronic disease, whether it be diabetes, whether it be heart failure, mental health is another contributing factor here, or those that we typically see as the recurring type of illnesses. So we have to find a way to manage these disease states and manage them early so that we don't end up with these long-term care issues and expensive modes of healthcare. And it's also provision of healthcare. We know that we can't create the healthcare community fast enough today. What about countries like India and China, where they don't even have the infrastructure to even deliver healthcare? How about Africa, where they don't even have the healthcare professionals to be able to even begin to implement there? So we have to understand that we need to find new ways of provisioning healthcare to be able to handle the oncoming onslaught of individuals who are in the market space, not only here in the US, but on a global basis as well. And finding ways to effectively manage that population so that you help individuals, clinicians, operate at the top of their licensure, so that you protect the resources like physicians to make their real critical decisions and have them implement and work in the areas that they need to be working in. So we take a look at this here. We have a Continua architecture. What we do is we're finding ways to standardize this architecture. So our focus is truly on taking a class of medical devices. Currently today that includes 13. They're a lot of the ometers that you're familiar with, pulse oximetry, thermometers, blood pressure, weight scales, glucometers, and things like that. Also includes things like motion sensors, medication administration. And then there's an area there called, we call independent living activity. And these are things such as, environmental sensors, so gas, water sensing, so that I can ensure that the individual doesn't have a gas leak, doesn't have a water leak, doesn't have a fire going on. And how you standardize that implementation so that you can capture this information effectively and be able to then communicate that, whether that be through, when we originally started, it was through PCs. That was 7 years ago. Well, we didn't even have tablets, and a smartphone wasn't even, the Apple iPhone wasn't around then. Now we're progressing, and so what we do is, this is a living type of an aspect of how we're focusing the standards. How do we move into using that smartphone, using that enabled technology that we have in our hand to be able to collect this data and then pass it on in the back end? Most importantly, it's about that data. How do I collect those multiple sensor streams, create a single model for how that information is then passed on into electronic medical records, personal health records, information health exchanges. And that's using the appropriate security, because we have to understand that there are security requirements around this data, not only here in the US, but also in the EU. And making sure that data can arrive in a common format. So it's really about taking all of this data, finding a standard way of implementing it so that you can reuse this implementations. You as healthcare professionals that are out there in the audience today can take a device. Today it's a blood pressure cuff. I can use it for following an individual who may be following up from post-CHF for 90 days. But once I'm done with that, the individual is functioning well. We don't necessarily have to monitor them on an ongoing basis. I can then reuse that equipment and plug it in and use it for a diabetic, perhaps, who's also being followed for some other process. That's the importance of using this technology like this, is being able to implement it and reuse this technology and be able to have a lifespan of this technology. Today, we implement today, and it's fairly proprietary technologies. You end up with a solution in the market space that's designed for diabetics, but can't be reused for an elder population, perhaps. And so what we have to do is make sure that we have that ability to reconfigure the equipment as necessary, be able to download a new app if we want, and be able to reuse that equipment so that we can now monitor more effectively or update it more effectively in that case. It also allows us to keep existing equipment in play longer. So we can keep existing technology, if it's standardized, in play and be able to continue to implement it over a much longer lifespan. We include today 13 technologies. We're doing things that are important. We have organizations like the NIH who are working with us on, and also the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, who are looking at how do we create and standardize the artificial pancreas. You think, well, that's kind of odd. Why do we want to do that? Well, it's taking the things, simple things like a glucometer, continuous glucose monitor, taking an insulin pump, and then making sure that they can talk together effectively. And once we do that, then we effectively have an artificial pancreas. It's creating those standards so that we know that if I take that device from company A and I can take the glucose meter from company B, that I know that I can make sure that they're going to work together and that that implementation is going to be safe and effective in that case. The important thing that Continua is doing this, though, is on a global basis. What we're trying to do is set standards so that we don't implement just in the US or just in the EU or just in China, for example. It's truly being able to bring that economy of scale to the market space and making sure that we can standardize and create technologies that are effective globally, and we don't have that single country-specific implementation. I think that's the biggest factor that we're doing, which we see will help lower the cost of those devices on an ongoing basis. This is just an example, and I'll talk a little bit more about it during our overall questions, but we implemented this technology very rapidly after the post-tsunami and earthquake in Japan. And this technology we were able to literally get this technology in place in one of the refugee camps in 10 days. Normally, it would have taken close to 10 weeks to implement standardized technology off the shelf that wasn't standard, doesn't have the interoperability features. But it took us 10 days, and it saved a significant amount of manpower on the back end of having to create custom applications and be able to collect that data. The ultimate aspect of this was that we saw that there was a significant cost savings in not only implementation, but also in the outcomes of these individuals as well who were able to be monitored in this case. So it did have some real-world application in the implementation. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more, but thanks very much, though.
Thanks, Josh. Well, last we have Joe, and Joe's from the Partners for Health, Center for Connected Health Partners. And, well, I guess I'll have to ask you the question I asked you at dinner last night. I'll have to explain just a tad bit about what Partners is, and then give us your thoughts on how you guys are positioned around it in health.
Okay, so thank you, Eric, for the opportunity to present here today, and thank you, all of you, for the opportunity to talk before you and to my esteemed colleagues. So I'll try to speak within 3 minutes, maybe 4 at most, so that I can learn from all of you and we can get to the Q&A part of this. So, again, my name's Joe Ternullo, and I have been at Partners Healthcare System for now just over 17 years, doing what you are all doing now. So Partners Healthcare System is a large integrated delivery system in Massachusetts, and the founding members of Partners are Mass General Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital. There are many other organizations that are part of Partners as well. Very large home care units, Spalding Hospital, McLean, number of community hospitals, but I wanted to give you an idea of who the organization is. It is an organization that has approximately $8.5 billion of revenue and 60,000 employees. So that will give you a general idea of the size and scope. The Center for Connected Health is a 53-person group that is a division of the IS department of Partners Healthcare System. And so what was I doing 17, 18 years ago coming to the Center for Connected Health? And that was a time that was very similar to the times that we're in now. It had to do with payment model reform. In those days, the word that was used was capitation, which is not all that dissimilar from what we're looking at now. We're sort of in an in-between place from fee-for-service, moving to global payment, bundled payment, ACOs. And the thought back then was that it was very important for partners, healthcare, to experiment with technology to provide new avenues and new avenues and new access to care, which is fundamentally what we're all talking about today. And the last person to comment on the previous panel talked about the challenges of our evolving healthcare system and of this space, and said, you know, we need all of the stakeholders to coordinate together, and it's challenging. That I've heard that, and probably most of us wouldn't be involved in this if it wasn't challenging. If it were easy, we'd leave it to somebody else to be involved, and we would, because of the intellectual curiosity, we would naturally gravitate. I think everybody in this room would naturally gravitate to something that was challenging. So 17 or to 18 years ago, when I was asked to be a part of this, the terminology that was used was innovator. And this is a great time to be involved in healthcare because you have an opportunity to make a real difference. And if you're really, really lucky, someday, people might call you a pioneer. So I would say that to all of you. Everybody in this room is at a minimum an innovator. Many of you will probably become pioneers. Eric knows, because you might have seen him yesterday sitting next to me. At one point you saw probably napkins in his ears, because I can talk a dog off of a meat wagon, and I was sitting next to him talking the entire evening. So I'll try to wrap it up. I said 4 minutes within 6. What our group is all about is fundamentally envisioning a day when the locus of care shifts from the provider to the person. That's happened in many other industries. It happened in banking. And as the locus of care shifts from the provider to the person, the provider is going to want to remain relevant in that deconstructed healthcare world. And what we're doing, and I think all of you are doing, are building roadways between the provider and the person. You're using technology to take the knowledge of a specialist, a caregiver, an allied health professional, and bringing it right to the point of need wherever. So I use this because I like it. My daughters think that I am in the Stone Age because I don't have an iPhone yet. I should. But as I can bank, the locus of commerce is now me and this, as I can bank anywhere I want, free of time and geography restrictions. There's going to come a day soon, within 10 years, where most of our care can be handled on devices like this. And that's what our group is all about. And I think that I'm just over 6 minutes, so I'm going to stop, and I probably will say more later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I will tell you, I happily was able to finish my salmon last night, even though you didn't. Yeah, I was a hungry dog last night, and you didn't talk me off the meat truck. I did. But we had a great conversation.
And I do have 7 slides, which you're all going to get, and I'd be more than delighted to talk to any of you after this meeting or during lunch and so forth.
So let's get down to business, talk a little bit about some of the business models. And I thought I'd start with you, Cameron, just because you're living in this thing, and I'm sure you and your colleagues are focused on it 24/7. How are we going to get paid for what we're doing? And you have this very kind of interesting delivery model that you're working with. What do you see there in terms of the business model development for yourself, and maybe things around you that you admire, things that you guys are looking at that's saying to yourself, that's pretty interesting business model for a startup that's trying to do some related mHealth kinds of things.
Sure. And I'll make comments probably starting most where we're focused the most, which is around the area of home health. And so as we look at the home health area, what we see from an EHR landscape is really kind of more of a land grab. So I think you've got companies like Cerner and others that have built out their business largely starting with the acute facilities and the hospitals, and then now they're sort of, as you get into home care, there's a little bit of a different environment. Certainly some of those players are there, but there's also more startups, and there are more companies that are looking to build an EHR platform focused on delivery to those home care patients. So a lot of what they're dealing with are the clinical workflows around getting the right things set up for reimbursement, getting the right things set up for patient scheduling, and things that are allowing them to really run their business. Where I think it's starting to evolve to, and where we're involved, is it's moving towards getting beyond that, sort of the basics of the execution for collecting information for billing purposes and scheduling purposes, and getting into how can we most effectively help people manage clinical workflow? How can we help clinicians with clinical decision support? How can we provide some of the reports and alerts that are allowing them to both clinically and economically better manage their business? And so that's where we see a lot of things starting to move.
So go ahead.
I just got to add, because I do get to see also several different business models across the globe as well on how some of these companies are actually implementing these technologies as well. I think that what we're seeing is that, you know, it's not only that there's multiple ways of this that you're going to have and see implementations of these technologies. Some of it's through cost savings. So we know that, for example, when you take a look at the ACO or the accountable care organizations that have been implemented, that we want to see that cost savings being implemented. These are new models by which we want, you know, if you're being paid, I'm just using an example, $1,000 per head for managing somebody's health care, you don't want them now to be in the hospital. You want to get them out as soon as possible. So that cost now shifts to how do I keep them at home longer, or how do I keep them in that model. The 30-day readmit issues now that we're seeing also are coming into play, and keeping individuals out of that cycle so that we keep them at home longer, or keep them in that positioning and that capability. We're also seeing some very unique business models that will begin to implement where they'll be able to manage individuals, but on a 1 to 300 individual basis. So we're now starting to see the technology is good enough to implement so that I can manage somebody effectively across, you know, 1 to 300 individuals in those cases. And with the current reimbursements, we can actually see that that's actually effective.
So Chuck, let me just stay with you for a second, because you mentioned earlier about this pancreas.
Yes.
You know, with these, you know, kind of two different players that maybe aren't building the standards that would really allow them to kind of collaborate. What incentives, from a business point of view, would they have to get there? You know,
so ultimately what you have to do and think about today is that an individual company has to maintain an entire set of standards, and well, not standards, but an entire set of how they collect that data. What you want to do is get to the point where, you know, if it's a device manufacturer, have them focus on the device. Today, for example, Roche Diagnostics, who is, you know, obviously makes a glucometer, they have to, in essence, today not only manage that glucometer, but also the connection to in the physician office, and then that on the back end of that, the whole stack of for actually how that data gets collected and implemented. That's not their forte. That's not what they're in business for. That's not where their intelligence is. It's in that device and understanding how to implement that device. Yet by not having standards, they're forced to maintain an entire architecture on how to get that data to flow effectively into electronic medical records. So ultimately what you do is you allow companies who are focused on that, what they do best, particularly smaller companies who are innovating quickly, to focus on the technology and not have to worry about the technology at the back end, how that data is going to get connected. And that's ultimately what we're looking at today with two companies that may be focused on how to integrate those two things. You know, ultimately, you know, you would have a much longer time to market, because I can't take, for example, a Dexcom and then plug it into a Medtronic pump and make sure that they can connect and communicate together. Same thing with Roche, you know, so we have other companies that are playing this game today. Ultimately, they would have to be able to maintain, they would have to create that entire system, create a reporting mechanism, and then have to go to the FDA and get that approved. Whereas today, if you simply can focus on one of those technologies, it's a much faster time to market for all the parties involved, and it's a much lower cost of maintenance and ownership for that technology on the back end as well.
I mean, Paul, you sit in a dominant EHR company, Cerner being number two-player, I guess, or number one player, depending on what you're talking about. So you guys are clearly a dominant player. What kinds of business models do you see within Cerner to make some of this possible? You know, Chuck's talking about being able to dump that device data right into the EHR that you're selling. And then I want you to put on the Sotera hat, which is a company you guys are investing in, a startup. But that's kind of a different world. Let me start with Cerner.
Well, we don't always know what business models we're going to do, but we have a philosophy that says if it's good for healthcare, it's good for Cerner. And that really hasn't failed us in 35 years. But to give you an example, probably a third of our revenue that we have today are in business lines that did not exist in the year 2000. More importantly, 75% of all our backlog are in those business lines. So we are now, this year we'll sell hundreds of million dollars in actual devices, okay? We host over almost 750 hospitals. We are now running IT at over a dozen clients, all IT. So I actually ran NextGen and Allscripts and Siemens and all those clients, okay? We continually try to evolve our business. Again, looking at new opportunities, how we leverage those platforms. So about 7 or 8 years ago in the device area, we created a bus architecture that allowed devices to connect. We now have over 1,300 certified devices from over 210 manufacturers. So if you're a pump manufacturer, we know the API for a pump. Not only can we get all that data, but we can actually program the pump. We were the first client, the first company ever to actually, from an EMR order, change the pump settings. Okay? Okay. So we initially, in our roadmap, had about 70 solutions for the acute, home, ambulatory, and other settings. They carried everything from the ICU all the way down to home health. 3 years ago, we started to develop one for the population. There are over 75 now modules there, as well as a number of services. Services we do on the acute side are, as I mentioned, complete outsourcing. But we also now are running the back office or the whole revenue cycle for clients, okay? We look at home health, we look at population health as probably a much larger market. So there will be the revenue cycle. There's going to be a whole bunch of data analytics. Okay, we're working with Advocate, a large provider in Chicago, to really look at new algorithms because, as you mentioned, the average person has 4 or 5 major problems and comorbidities. So they're diabetic, they're overweight, they may have hypertension, cholesterol, etc. They're probably on 12 to 13 meds, okay? And they're probably over the age of 65, okay? Okay, so how do we really look at new ways of getting information from them? And that's where mobility has to happen. Because today we probably can't even find all their EMR records, okay? And even if we do, to normalize that data, we're the first company to actually, I work with a lot of companies and they have HIEs, and you pull up their HIE record, okay? And you see penicillin. I'm allergic to penicillin. I'm allergic to penicillin. You see aspirin on their med list 14 times because nobody normalized the data. So we've actually created an ontology where we can normalize that data and say, yes, they are allergic to penicillin. Yes, they do take aspirin, okay? Okay, but try to communicate that. But that's data from snippets in time, okay? We really need data from what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, one of the nurses I work with in population, her mother has recently had problems. She monitors her weight daily. Then if she sees it increasing, okay, she'll know she's had an I&O problem, okay? So let's get her back on Lasix, okay? Those are the type of things, and we talked about, families having to monitor. I've had, I'm going to have to leave shortly after this because I'm going to celebrate my father-in-law's 90th birthday. I still have a mother, and my other two parents, both lived fairly long, so good genes, okay? But we really need to develop a whole nother list of services to help with those types of things, but we need to now look at devices totally different. Because most of those 1,300 devices I talked about work in the acute setting, although many of them I mean, majority of them are now wireless, and the majority of them have potential in other environments, okay? So, you know, we created within the hospital and within doctor's office smart rooms where everything is wirelessly monitored on that patient. And we can actually program, you know, that 60,000 Huron bed to actually change the elevation, okay? Or the pump to change the drip, okay? Or the shades to go up and get you out of bed if you're in a rehab hospital, okay? That's what we need to do now for other environments, okay? Whether that's skilled nursing, whether that's the home, okay? It's possible. It's possible, okay?
Paul, so let me turn to the startup world, your Cerner device you have on your own. And what's going to kill them? And why you mentioned in your introduction that you see many of these companies and know that they're not going to make it, even though they might be good for healthcare in some ways. What is it about the business models that make them fail and one of the ones that are successful?
Well, I think several things. One is basically healthcare, and I think one of the panels is very, very, very hard. Okay, I don't think a lot of companies like to focus. We started 35 years ago. We weren't in healthcare. After 3 years, we found out that if we're going to be in healthcare, we're going to be only in healthcare. I like to tell a story about companies like IBM, Google, the stuff. IBM has been in healthcare on and off since '82. They were one of the largest providers of software to the hospital. Okay, but it's a real hard business. Okay, and they get out of it. And then some young MBA from Tuck comes in and says, you know, why aren't you in healthcare? Let's go back into it. They pour a couple $100 million in it. Okay, 3 years later, they go, where did that $100 million? Everybody gets fired. CEO goes. 2 years later, new MBA comes in. Okay, I lost a lot of bets because I thought Google would actually last 4 years in the business, and they lasted less than 2. Okay, Microsoft. You cannot do this business if you don't wake up and think about healthcare. The focus is it. We could take half of our infrastructure, all of our consultants, a lot of our software, and port it to 20 other industries. Well, why would you port to an industry that isn't going to grow as fast as healthcare? That's just a stupid waste of resources. But we want to focus in. Focus is probably the key. I will say focus, and underestimating how really hard it is. Okay, this blood pressure, when I'm like this, you know, this would have been beep. I took it off because this would have been beeping like crazy. Okay, but you got to know when I'm standing up, sitting down, moving, all those type of things, and make adjustments. And sometimes you say, hold it, that data is going to be garbage because he just went crazy. Okay, so and you know, false alarm. You know, the problem with most devices is too many damn false alarms. And then you ever walk in ICU, there's stuff going on. Nurses aren't doing any damn thing. They're just basically doing their business. Alarms go off, fine. Okay, they just can't pay attention. So alert fatigue. So we've got to basically focus. But, and you know, I'm trying to get these guys, they were trying to say, well, we're going to create a whole bunch of intelligent alerting systems and stuff. Guys, slow down. Get this device to market. Figure out your business, okay? Don't lose that focus, okay? Okay, you know, I've been living in the field for 3.5 years because I used to spend about 40 weeks out of the year going to see clients, and now I live in the field. I live part-time in San Diego. The reason I live in San Diego, wireless, great, actually, bunch of companies in that area, as well biotech, as well we've got a lot of great clients out there. And the only way I learn to innovate is walking the damn floors. Going out and seeing people, okay? What do they do, and why can't I help them? Because they ain't going to tell me what I can do. So, okay. I don't know if that answered your question.
That sounds, we'll let your blood pressure drop a little bit.
Actually, I've been known to give high blood pressure more than I get it.
At one point I would just like to make and kind of carry through some of the things that that Paul was mentioning is that it is going to introduce a new round of healthcare. You know, you asked a question early on. And it's going to introduce a new set of players to the market space that we haven't seen before. You know, and you take a look at the next couple of years. Who are some of the new players that are coming to market? You know, it's not only the success of these smaller devices like that, but it's some organizations who you wouldn't typically associate with healthcare. It's the telcos. You know, if you're looking at creating a smartphone app, these organizations already have the customer retail distribution network in place to manage that sort of solution set. Healthcare doesn't. They don't have that retail channel yet. And they have the ability to bill incrementally as well on top of that. So it's something that what we're going to look at here is new partnerships that we haven't seen today in the market space. It's going to create new business opportunities, particularly around the telco marketing space.
So Joe, you were talking about partners and the fact that partners has both this acute care facilities and right out to home health care. When you start thinking about the span of business models there, what do you see working? Where do you see the opportunities for that now?
Okay, so I guess I'm going to echo what I had heard earlier. I think Chuck had mentioned it. So to me, providers and partners included is still in an experimentation phase. If it generates revenue, if it contains cost, which is Chuck's comment, or improves quality, it's interesting, potentially interesting, maybe very interesting. You know, I want to just pick up on a couple of other things here. Again, to the comment of we all should be, the stakeholders should all be together. My own observation, and this is again my observation, not partner's observation, is I don't really think that payers at this point are highly focused on this area. I think they're focused on exchanges. I think pharma is looking at this, but they're not even as involved, in my opinion, as providers are. And I agree with you that the activity that you see here is telcos. I had that same observation myself. This is a new market for them, and there are opportunities that will come. Very early days. Anyway, that's my observation.
Yeah. So Cameron, back to you, and you know, one of the things that we see in a lot of discussion about is how these devices and these kind of services can kind of enable more patient-centered communities that the healthcare professionals, families, patients. Is that an opportunity for you guys? I mean, do you see that as an opportunity to get others involved in wound care other than the patient itself, other communities around that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And you know, using obviously wound care as an example for some broader themes there, the answer is yes. And so what ends up happening with us is we're not only engaging the nurse who's actually seeing the patient at bedside, we're providing that data and information back to a nurse manager or back to a wound care expert at WOCN, who can then look across the patient population and understand what's going on, where there might be problems. Also, nurses are sharing some of that information with the patients. We're delivering to them a personalized dressing that oftentimes they can have a family member use to execute a dressing change. So that gets them more involved and engaged in, and actually it can increase their compliance to following the treatment regimen. And then we're linking that back to the prescribing physician. So if you look at a wound care clinic physician or a primary care physician who oftentimes would say, I send a patient into home health and I'm not really sure always what's going on. I'm not really sure what's happening. Well, here's a way to connect back with a system that can provide you with some real-time information. So there is certainly an opportunity there, and that it is something that we're doing. There are challenges around that.
Yeah, I mean, so one I'm still waiting to hear from you. How do you get paid for that? How does? So
there's two things. I mean, one, from our business model specifically, I mean, we provide a therapeutic, so we're providing a dressing that we are getting reimbursed.
So all the rest is kind of
and then,
thrown in as part of the deal?
Well, yes, and there's some, I mean, there's basically sort of the base level. I mean, we have kind of like a freemium model. So there's sort of a base level that is provided that goes with the agency. And then as you get into more of the sort of advanced reporting and analytics and things like that, there's an upcharge that your more sophisticated players would be interested in, so that they can,
in this case.
Yeah, so that they can drive improvements and changes across their organization.
Or
no, I mean, typically the structure from a Medicare standpoint, which a lot of managed care follows, is that they were receiving a bundled payment for treating a patient over a 60-day period. And so on average, they might get something like $3,000 for a 60-day episode. And they have to manage the number of nurse visits. They have to manage the usage of supplies to follow the physician, working in conjunction with the physician on a care plan. And so the opportunity is heal a patient faster, less visits, teach a family member to do a dressing change, less visits, share this information back with the physician, make sure you're coordinated on the care plan, so you're doing things to drive improvements in the economics by creating more efficiencies. So that's really the
So it's a cost savings argument.
It is a
They're
cost-
gonna get paid a certain amount of money.
It's a-
and if you can provide better treatment
Correct.
at a lower cost.
Correct.
the
So it's
private eye will pick you.
it's a cost savings opportunity and it's a quality opportunity. So now you're getting data that you can go back to referral sources and say, look, here's what I'm doing to manage my wound care population. You should be sending me more of your patients because I'm going to help reduce readmissions. I'm going to help reduce infections. I'm going to heal these patients faster and better, so that you should look to my agency as a place where you want to send those patients. And that's is how we see it sort of evolving too when you get into more of the discussions around things like accountable care and ultimately those institutions that are real. I don't want to send somebody home and have them come back in with an infection or have them come back in with a dehisced wound that I'm now going to have to take back into the hospital. So you're sort of building on that whole.
So Joe, will you see your providing hospitals buying this wound care service?
I'm not sure, but I know that I want to talk with him during lunch a little bit more and get to know a little bit more about his product. And he's nearby in Concord, Massachusetts.
But is that, in your mind, from partners' point of view, is that the primary kind of model? An mHealth provider comes in with some package of services that somehow reduces your costs?
So as I said, to me, from my perspective, if it is a cost containment or a revenue opportunity, a new opportunity to attract patients or generate revenue, very interesting. Improving quality, the same thing, because the higher one's quality scores, the more likelihood that one would attract new business. But what's interesting about this is I would guess, this is what we talked about yesterday, that you're absolutely right. On a one by each basis, there's no question in my mind that what you're talking about saves money. The question is, in the aggregate, does all of this save money? And I'm not sure that it necessarily does. It might not.
Okay, Paul, when you look at Sotera again, is it a cost-saving argument they're going to the hospitals?
I think there's going to be 2 or 3, or we're working on ROIs with one of the pilot clients, but it's good. I think safety and quality are going to be number 1, okay? But almost everybody, based upon IHI, implemented a rapid response type of deal. And if we can basically do continuous monitoring, the whole ability to do responses to quickly generating patients and potentially keep those guys out of the ICU, which is costing 2 to 3, 4 times more than what a normal bed is costing, will be huge. Okay, so I think from that point of view, this device, my biggest problem with Sotera, they totally underpriced it. I mean, fully loaded, it's going to be less than $6,000. Okay, can't even buy one of those monitors to roll around for the same price. Like I said, I told them they had their, I don't know what they were thinking. Okay, but their actually business model is around reusables. Okay, because they will have the leads and the other things that you will continue to use every time the patient has to do it. So they are selling razor blades. Okay, but I think that, so you get into to qualities, and then as we go through this is if we are able then to really reduce, as you said, and even as we go to a more capitated model, reduce those days, okay, and get those patients out with potentially then with monitoring at home so that we can effectively eliminate readmissions or reduce readmissions, okay. The best best hospital stay will go to hell if you haven't really followed up with a patient. And how do you do that easily, okay? And I don't look at home health as sending somebody out there anymore, okay? Hopefully they can take a picture with their phone, put that into the system, okay? Why not, okay? So if we can do those 3 or 4 things, we're going to start to really significantly reduce costs. And I think that, like I said, people with some chronic conditions and multiple conditions are going to look at more and more. This is, Dr. Topol's on our board. He's with the Scripps Translational Medicine. He thinks that this value is really for the home. Okay, it's nice for the hospital, but the home will be where really the true value will be. Okay.
Could I pick up on that? And this might be a little bit of an edgy discussion, because I think what Paul just said was in furtherance of my point that it's not clear to me that collectively mHealth will save any money, because what he said is, my biggest problem is that they underprice it. So the product that he's talking about, to use round numbers, let's say that the assumption is that it's going to result in a $10,000 savings to the system. So I think what he was saying is, gee, if it's going to result in a $10,000 savings to the system, maybe we should have priced it at $8,000, something along those lines, or opportunistic, which makes sense. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Well, I always try to look at it. When I do pricing, I always try to look at what is the ROI, what is the value. So we bought a company called Apache, which does data analysis for the ICU in terms of looking at mortality, whether or not a person should be there. When we priced it, I looked at the documented savings by people who used it for low admission patients only, okay, getting them out of the ICUs, and we were able to price it so there was a 3-month return on investment. Okay. And so you really got to create value, okay?
And then you want to collect for that value. That makes perfect sense to me. What Paul is saying is 100% logical. But for every action, there is a reaction. Now, if all of the rest of us were on the side of the providers that are delivering care as occurred before this intervention came to market, and we were charging $10,000 for these procedures, and suddenly that intervention came to market and was so effective that it cut the need for the procedures in half. Well, we are providers. We've got to pay bondholders. We have a relatively fixed labor staff. We're not going to just let doctors and nurses go at will. We have union contracts. So our reaction to Paul's wonderful intervention is probably going to be that next week, Monday, once we realize that the number of procedures are cut in half, is that we end up doubling the price for the procedures that we now do. We used to do 100, now we're going to do only 50. The price of those 50 go up double, and probably go up a little bit more than double. So what is the net effect in the system? We're getting paid the same. We now have a system that is really giving better care. There's no question in my mind. But we are also paying not what. Now, I'm not picking on Paul. I'm really honored to be. So well, but you get the point.
But the point is, we're not talking. This is totally separate. We got a reimbursement system that is archaic, obstruction to effective delivery. Everyone wants to know how we're going to pay for health care. $300 billion. You know who's $300 billion? A payer. They are larger than Johnson & Johnson, United Health. What value do they owe to health care? They do one thing. They piss off my wife. Okay, let me tell you a fact. We were self-insured.
I told you this was going to be edgy.
We were self-insured 7 years ago. Self-insured. Yet we were paying $18 for every claim processed. So an average visit may cost you $120. That was for somebody who said they had a network and processed our paper and pissed off my wife. Okay, so we said, we're going to do it. We need a whole new middle. I mean, Nobody knows how much you pay for health care. I can tell you I paid a lot of money for health care last year. Not necessarily for me, but I'll tell you what, it was a big number, okay? No one knows. Health care is like gambling in Vegas. You get these chips, and it's all funny money. I don't think any person can tell me how much of your income went to health care last year. I actually probably can. I just won't disclose it now, but I look at it.
So the reason I mention this is not to negate mHealth or any other innovation, excuse me, that's coming to the fore. I want to say something else. Another reason mHealth is absolutely needed. If you take someone like me, I'm 54 years old. I don't know how much time I have left. Let's say I have 30 years left if I'm lucky. 30 years left. Eventually, I'm going to die. Or through exchanges and electronic health records, maybe I'll shift my care somewhere else. Whoever my provider is now, if I leave, that provider is going to have to replace me. Whatever it costs to maintain me as a patient, and all of you as patients of your providers, if you went next week and shifted to someone else, if it cost $1 to maintain you, it's your provider is going to spend probably $5 to find someone else to replace you. My children, although they think that I'm in the Stone Age on this because they have iPads, iPhones, they are not used to engaging in the world, and they're not used to the world that I knew. Phone rings at home, you pick it up. They don't pick it up. They do everything remotely, via text. There's no way that the entitled generation, which is their generation, is going to engage in the healthcare system the way we are used to engaging. So whether it's the telcos, whether it's Paul's technology, Cameron's technology, or the vision that Chuck has, that has to be the future. What I'm scratching my head over is, fundamentally, I do not think in the aggregate, the way the system is structured, it's going to contain costs.
And I want to take on Joe's point just a little bit here, because I think there's actually an issue here that we're perhaps overlooking, and that is with the Accountable Care Act. Once it begins to get implemented, we're bringing 27 million people to healthcare today that don't have healthcare today. We saw a very similar incident of that when Massachusetts passed its universal healthcare law 3 or 4 years ago. I was in Massachusetts at the time, and what we saw was that the average patient population of a physician, a general practice physician, going from 1 in roughly 2,500 to 1 in almost 4,000. So you simply can't deliver health care at that level. And we're not going to produce a significant number of new physicians in the next 2 years when ACA gets completely implemented. And so we're going to have to, the system itself, while maybe not today, maybe not next year, within 2 to 3 years is going to have to change, because there is an entirely new population coming to the healthcare market that we haven't been seeing lately, and they're going to be covered as far as covered lives are concerned. And so we have to find new ways of doing that. I now live in a state in Texas where we have 27 counties that have no doctors. We have to find new ways of delivering healthcare, because there's no way, we think about third world Africa not having doctors. I live in a state that has 27 counties that have no doctors. It's 120 miles one way to get to a doctor. So we have to find new ways to help these individuals who are going to be treated in this fashion as well.
Yeah. So I want to turn into the audience for some questions, but I just want to go down the line while you guys are ginning up your questions. Who's going to be the winner from mHealth? Payers, providers, startup companies, established technology players, telcos. Who's the winner? Just 1 or 2 words.
The person is the winner. I agree with not using the term patient, and the provider, because the provider has the financial risk nowadays, and they do not have the tools to properly manage that financial risk. These tools that you all and others are developing will help them to manage that risk.
I think ultimately it's you as an individual from a healthcare payer perspective, whether that's coming out of your taxes, whether that's coming out of your insurance directly that you pay, that comes out of your paycheck directly, or for the out-of-pocket expenses that you're going to have. I think ultimately you're going to see that this longer term ultimately results in a different level of healthcare, that it's going to be more responsive to you. It will be more customized to you, and it will certainly provide you a different level of healthcare opportunity.
I think the individuals are going to benefit greatly from the developments in mHealth. I think that EHR companies are very well positioned to be a platform for collecting and using that data, and for integrating in some of the novel things that hopefully companies like myself and some of the other things that we've heard about today can provide into that EHR system.
I actually think the person, as we mentioned, but I also think it's our country. The Russians couldn't beat us, terrorists won't destroy us, but healthcare has the potential of bankrupting this country. Okay, carry it out. If something is seriously done, you can't be spending 30% of your income and increasing faster than your GDP and continue that indefinitely. We have for 50 plus years, almost 63 years, since 1950, grown healthcare 2 to 4% faster than the economy. Okay? That's why we're really smart kids when we got in healthcare. Okay. And biology is guaranteeing demand's going to increase for the next 2 decades.
It's worth noting that we spend 3 times more than any other country in the world per capita, and we are about number 20 in the developed world in terms of the results we get. Right. So anybody, I live in Washington, D.C., where people believe that we have the best healthcare system in the world. At least elected people believe we do. We don't. We have a crappy system that costs a hell of a lot of money. Question for you. If I wanted the earlier panel was talking about integrating mental health and wellness and vitality into a kind of person-based system. If we wanted that kind of a system, none of the current providers are going to deliver that because they have niches, they have fixed costs, they have people who fix sick people. I think that's who will benefit. I think it'll be Walmart who will benefit because nobody benefits from IT. They use IT. Right, so the IT doesn't cause anything. It's somebody using the IT and mobile health to do stuff. But who do you think will be the big corporate player who will hire Cerner in a new model and blow away the market with an integrated package that has nutrition and healthcare, wellness and mental health in it?
I'm going to go back to my statement early on about the telcos. I think it's going to be a Verizon, AT&T, maybe a T-Mobile who gets innovative in the market space. Because they already have that, like you said with Walmart, they have that relationship, they already understand that. They have a back-end data collection mechanism that can manage data at very large volumes. And they have relationships that they can tap into with the healthcare professionals today. So I mean, they can link that data and can provide steerage of that data to appropriate professionals. So I think ultimately, if we take a look at who are the potential winners in this area, I think they're going to be one of them because, as Joe is quick to mention here, we all are carrying these devices today, and those devices are only going to become more popular and more prevalent.
And I don't think it's true that healthcare is going to come to a calamitous end. I think you made the point, David, that I had neglected to mention the new entrants, whether it be Walmart or Target or the telcos. Healthcare it's an amazing thing, the way it is growing organically in a different direction. And probably 10 or 15 years from now, healthcare will not be on the front page consuming so much of our GDP because others have come in with technology, fresh ideas, and rescued it and enabled it to grow in a different direction. So I don't know whether it's the Walmarts or not, but I do think that healthcare will be rescued.
Hi, 2 extreme questions, if I may. One is in signals, there's this idea of a dumb antenna and a smart antenna. In a similar way, if you're thinking about mobile health, would we be just better off not doing mobile health, or would we be better off going through this whole data analytics process, collecting all this data using mobile phones and so on? Just to give you an example, I worked on a mobile microfinance project with folks in Mexico. And it was a fantastic rollout and so on, and they wanted to take it to market. 3,000 workers, they had to buy a $250 phone for each person. and they had to pay $20 per month for data connectivity. So their CapEx was close to $1 million, and their OpEx was close to $1 million. They basically said no. The second question is, if you're going into developing countries like Africa, is there anything that can be taken from here that can be significantly adopted in that context? Or do you foresee innovations coming from there which are going to be adopted in this context? So,
Is that directed to who?
anybody.
Maybe I guess I'll give my quick response to each one. So to the last question, it works both ways. We can learn a lot from them, and they are in a resource-constrained environment, and they're making things happen. And historically, healthcare has not been resource-constrained. In fact, you might say, if you go back to the enactment of Medicare, that it was hard to lose money in healthcare in the early days. So we can learn something from them, they can learn something from us. As for the other point that you mentioned, which was, should we do mHealth? I think the answer is yes. We are evolving. Just like a person grows through their childhood, adolescence, and so forth to a full adult. It's not the issue of the technology, like mHealth is going to solve all the problems. It is part of an evolving system, and we'll move beyond the mHealth technology someday. I don't know what it is, maybe it's quantum health, but we have to go through this process. To me, the important thing is the connection to the person. Like I can bank right now here. I don't have to go to a community bank like my parents did. I have more of a dependency on that bank today than they did. Healthcare providers are going to want their patients to have more of a dependency on them, on the healthcare providers, in a deconstructed healthcare world. The more I use online banking, the more it knows about me, the less likely I am going to be to switch to another bank because it's giving me so much value, that roadway. The technology has changed on that roadway, but I react to it when it arrives. And that's what I think is going to happen in healthcare.
I want to carry Joe's comment a little bit further on your first comment and first question about should we be doing this. The answer is yes, and without a doubt it's going to be required, I think, in the future. And that is because right now our system is based on episodic care. We wait till somebody is sick and shows up with a bad illness. We wait until they have some sort of critical functional activity that's in the play that we have to deal with. So, we take a look at the diabetic today, the type 1 diabetic or the type 2 diabetic. They are not in front of a healthcare professional 98.6% of the time. Today when you go to see an office visit, if you take a look at a heavy individual who may be actually seeing the system on a regular basis, which would be, let's say, for example, a diabetic, who's a requirement to go see it at least 4 times a year at their doctor, and then going to get labs drawn on a regular basis. They're not in front of the doctor that often. And they're frequently not in front of a healthcare professional at all in addition to that. So we don't know enough about the individuals yet to understand what makes them tick and what can we avoid. So it's more about, as Joe was mentioning, the quantified self is going to become more important and longer. We've got to shift our system from taking care of sick people to how do we keep people well. We understand, individuals are fairly high functioning at an early age, and we want to make sure that they can maintain that level of wellness much longer into their lifespan. Now, do we know what the answers are? No. I think that, using some of these analysis, using some of these tools on a much more longer and regular basis, we're going to generate very large sets of data that we can then quantify and say, this is a value for us to monitor this particular kind of condition. This is not a value. But it's going to take that evolution of, collecting that data for a period of time in order for us to be able to get to that point.
So why don't we grab another question, just so we get a couple more questions, unless you really want to weigh in on this one.
Go ahead. So the question is directed to Cameron and to some extent Chuck. I was just wondering, for entrepreneurs in this space, how do you view privacy, and maybe another part is the non-delivery of critical data, both from the provider to the patient. As a startup, how do you sort of take care of those issues?
Well, so it's part of our standards, for one thing. So we incorporate it as from day one as part of the standards on privacy. We actually very specifically went back to the Bluetooth SIG in order to actually fix that issue, because standard Bluetooth, the communication technology wasn't secure enough according to HIPAA guidelines. So we went back to Bluetooth and actually created a new one called the Health Data Profile, a new Bluetooth profile called Health Data Profile to actually fix that. So it's inherent within our.
Yeah, and we're very focused on making sure that everything we do is HIPAA compliant in all our interactions with with the caregivers and patients, et cetera. All the data that we're collecting is, we just have to make sure that we're setting it up so that it's done in a secure environment with the right structure and the right setup there and the right business associates agreements, et cetera, so that we make sure that we've got it buttoned down from start to finish as far as the handling and the managing of that data. So.
Yeah, it's actually interesting to note that Europe actually has higher requirements, and so we have to meet the highest requirements of all international bodies, and Europe is has much more stringent rules around this than the U.S. does.
One last question.
This is really directed both to Continua and Cerner. I know you both got interest in this issue of interoperability and being able to actually substitute different applications and tools. It seems like one of the problems with the e-health and mHealth space, especially in the US, is that you have many different systems. They don't really interoperate well, but also it's very difficult for innovative companies or academics or whatever to innovate on top of the existing systems, which often have all of the tools and the infrastructure that is needed to access the data and so on. So I just wondered if you had any quick comments about how to create more of a marketplace where the existing players don't feel too threatened, but there is ability for newer players to come in and actually work within that framework.
So I think from standards and interoperability actually introduce that. So it allows a newcomer to the market space to be able to say, I can create a plug-and-play environment for you. I can create a system of being able to connect devices which you've not been able to connect before. I can lower your cost of ownership on a longer-term basis because of, your devices aren't going to suddenly disappear or they're not going to be relevant anymore. I'm going to lower your cost of ownership because you're not going to have to custom program any longer. To every solution. And I'm going to lower your cost of ownership because ultimately the integration of that data to the EHR is a common channel. So it allows companies who are involved in that aspect to pitch a new model that eventually or very quickly start to overcome the incumbents. And we're starting to see that tip already start to happen in 4 countries across the globe already. That's already happened. So the nation of Denmark said, we're going to use this framework for open interoperability because it lowers our costs.
And is that an open framework? Is it proprietary, or is it something that can be shared, for example?
Everything on the continuous standards basis is based on an open standard.
Okay.
Part of the problem with interoperability, though, and standards have gone at the technical level, we don't even have a standardized vocabulary or ontology, so how the hell can we talk? That's really where we don't have a person ID, okay? I can't talk to you, and I don't know who you are. So how can I give you health care? And that's real, guys. That is real, okay? So those are fundamental problems we really have to extend out, okay?
The only additional item that I'd like to contribute to the discussion is that I think that the federal government could help catalyze this area in a way that one might not expect. When Medicare was enacted, I don't know what the average length of stay was in a hospital. I'm going to guess it was 30 days. Today, it's 3 to 5 days. Most care occurs outside of the hospital, yet residents are trained at academic medical centers. The federal government probably could look at examining the educational requirements and tilting it, recognizing mHealth, recognizing the ascendancy of home care, and just that tilt probably would help accelerate what we're talking about now. So it's my thought. I'm not sure that I'm right, but I want to contribute.
I would agree with that. I mean, Eric, you asked a question early on about startups and new companies and sort of what causes them, I think, a little bit to succeed or fail. And it's I've worked in big companies too, but time is so much the enemy. When you are in a startup company that is burning cash, that is trying to commercialize something, and one of the things that is a real challenge is the reimbursement landscape. And to the question about, should we continue to do mHealth? Absolutely. But every time we do it, you also got to follow the money. You also got to figure out who's going to pay for it, who's going to get reimbursed for it, how's that all going to work. And there's a lot of, as we all know, a lot of challenges and complexity that cause people to sometimes do what almost appears to be irrational things. in that environment, but they're doing it because they're following a reimbursement scheme and they're kind of following the money. So, definitely those kinds of things are things that I think, it doesn't mean there aren't opportunities. It just means that as you're doing these things, you've got to be cognizant of that landscape as well. So it might be a neat idea, but how's it all going to fit in and how's it going to help as the landscape continues to evolve?
All right, well, Paul, Cameron, Chuck, and Joe, you are the dream panel today. We did exactly what I hoped we would do, have a good, vigorous debate around the economics and follow the money, as Cameron said, of mHealth. I think now we're headed towards lunch, and are we going to follow you, Tom, Karen, up to?
Actually, can you give us some directions?
Yeah, so we're gonna head out this door and kind of snake our way down through the terrestrial parts of Tuck towards our last building to the east, which is Rather. And I think it's probably good if you kind of follow the herd. Some of the two people will be leading us, so it's good to follow them over there.